Welcome to the June edition of Payroll Question Time. I'm Steve Yardley, MD at JJ Recruitment, and I'll be hosting today's session. We have a lot to cover today, especially considering recent HMRC announcements and reminders coming through. So we'll get to those. However, it is the World Cup and it's well underway. I won't go on too long about this, I promise. But both England and Scotland have started with wins, which is fantastic. And amazingly, Scottish fans have also officially managed to drink New York dry. So well done, Scotland. Now, with most fans feverishly working out when and what time the matches are on, payroll and HR teams are tasked with working out who's suddenly asking for annual leave, flexible hours, or late starts. Fortunately, we'll be coming back to that exact matter later when we discuss summer workforce planning, absence management, and some of the challenges employers are likely to face over the coming weeks. As I said, a lot to cover today. Now, for anyone joining us for the first time, PQT is all about bringing together payroll experts to talk through what's happening in payroll right now and what actually means in practice for payroll teams and businesses. But most importantly, your questions are what really make these sessions work. So please do keep dropping them into the chat throughout the session, and then I can put them to our expert panel live. Keep them coming. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss anything, the slides will be shared afterwards. We'll also be sharing the latest HR Payroll Pulse Research 2026, which I believe has recently been updated. This is from SD Worx, and that will be shared at the end of the session. This report's fantastic. It's one of the largest HR and payroll research projects in Europe, covering topics such as workforce planning, payroll reliability, employee experience, AI, and pay transparency. So definitely worth downloading at the end. And as always, the caveat being that today's discussion is guidance and opinion only. So thank you for that. So with England's World Cup preparations dominating the headlines over the last few months, there's been a lot of discussion around planning, squad changes, and what the eventual team outcome will look like. It seems payroll teams are in a very similar position right now. It feels like payroll's in one of those periods where there's a lot happening, but not everything has happened yet. So with that focus, that's how we're going to approach this afternoon. And I would like to take time now to introduce you to today's panel and let them introduce themselves this time as well. So first up, Simon Parsons, Director of UK Compliance at SD Worx. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me along again. I think I've been to every one so far, but I'm UK Director of Compliance Strategies at SD Worx. Also sit as the chair of the BCS Payroll Specialist Group. That's the Chartered Institute of IT, and chair of IRENE, and sit on a number of HMRC consultation panels, as do some of the other members here. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals. I've been in the institute a long time. And was part of the first cohort that was awarded the Master of Science in Payroll Management. Good to be here.
Thank you ever so much, Simon. Moving on to Richard George, Payroll Compliance and Operations Consultant. Welcome,
Good
Richard.
afternoon, everybody. Everybody is well and not too tired. Some of us probably are, and some of us probably aren't. I'm playing left back today, my position. So 40 years now in payroll for my sins. Done a multitude of jobs, Reward 300, and always delighted to be here on each one.
Thank you, Richard. Over to Samantha Mann, Payroll Team Manager at Armstrong Watson. Hi, Sam.
Everyone, thank you again for having me back, Simon, and the team. And yes, like Simon, I've been in the payroll industry for a lot longer than I care to remember. And unlike Simon, I'm not really into football. So apologies, I will try not to look too yawny and bored when people start talking about football. But yes, lots of changes afoot in payroll, but then change is the norm in payroll. I think we can all agree on that.
Fantastic, thank you ever so much. And over to Karen Thompson, Head of Payroll at Armstrong Watson. Hi, Karen.
Good afternoon, everybody. I apologise, I've missed the last couple, so very pleased to be back. Like Sam, I have zero interest in football. Very pleased that Scotland and England, of course, are doing well. So I got my update today. Thank you very much to everybody else on the panel for that. But I do wish them all the very best. I sit, like Simon, sit on consultation forums, and one of them in particular is the Admin Burdens Advisory Board. which is looking at all taxes for mainly small business. But I just want to share, we celebrate 20 years next month of being in existence, and I'm very pleased to say I've been on that board for 20 years as well. So look forward to those celebrations. But good to be here and hopefully share insights as we go forward.
Good to have you back, Karen. Thank you. And finally, but by no means least, Matthew Akrigg, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm Matt. I'm Policy and Advisory Leader at the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals. This is probably the only time in the footballing calendar that I really care about football is during the World Cup, where I like to sit on my sofa with a beer calling professional athletes at the top of their game idiots, which I'm sure we all become experts on football at this time of the year. But I head up our Policy and Advisory Division, where we assist with keeping the payroll community updated, representing them at government forums. And I actually just did about a 6-month secondment into the policy team, the income tax policy team at HMRC. So it was a fantastic opportunity to see an inside view of how policy comes to life. So it's a fantastic experience that I'm sure I will share with many people over the years as I get more and more questions around payroll and benefits.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Matthew. And final pun, obviously we've got an amazing squad for today's match. So thank you ever so much, guys. I'll move on to payroll now. So I'm done on the football, I promise. So great mix of payroll operations, compliance and policy expertise here on the panel today. Please do make the most of them. We've got questions coming through already. I don't know if we want to go straight into this one. It's SSP question. I know it's not in line with where we are at the moment, but someone has a 0 hours worker who's provided a sick note for 2 weeks. During that period, only due to work 1 day. Do I only have to pay 1 day, the one he has due to work, or do I have to pay SSP for the 2nd week? No workers scheduled as employers have to have qualifying days. HR is saying only scheduled work days are qualifying days. Anyone want to jump in on that one?
Well,
say Simon after you.
Yeah, sure.
Everyone.
They're not quite correct, because for a 0 hours worker, well, under the statutory sick pay regulations, there has to be at least 1 qualifying day a week. Whether they're scheduled to work it or not, it's got no relevance. The relevance is whether they're absent sick on that day. And if they don't agree what that qualifying day is, it's Wednesday. So Wednesday is a qualifying day if they haven't agreed. But they could actually have 7 qualifying days if they wished, or 5 qualifying days if they only open 5 days a week. But to say that they only have to pay SSP for days scheduled is incorrect. They have to pay SSP for every absent day that's a qualifying day, and there has to be at least 1. So in the example given, they'd be due 2 weeks SSP.
Thank you ever so much.
Others may want to chip in there, and because I see a lot of this on social media.
Completely agree. And this was one of the things we spoke about in previous sessions, is to make sure you've nailed down your qualifying days, because in this case it's 1 day, which means for 1 day equals 1 week's worth of SSP. If you had done 5 days, and obviously you've struggled to do 7 unless if you only open 5 days a week, clearly. But whatever that is, and that's why we were encouraging people to really look at their qualifying days and for this very reason.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I love that. That question came before we even started. So obviously we're busy. There's loads to cover and everyone's keen to get going. Let's cover what we're doing today as well. So consultations, summer, P11D and PSA, payroll benefit in kinds, deemed employments, and of course any other questions. And at the end, obviously, the HR and payroll pulse research that we've mentioned previously. So if we're all okay to move forward, should we move through to the consultations? I think there's a lot currently under discussion, looking at 0 hour consultations, shift cancellations, late notice changes, rights to contracted hours and unpaid careers. So carers, sorry, unpaid careers, that doesn't sound very good, does it? I don't know if someone wants to pick up on this, on the 0 hour consultations.
I think, yeah, I'll go first, but the detail will come later, I'm sure. This is the one that I of all of the Make Work Pay kind of proposals that have come through as a result of the Employment Rights Act 2025, this is the one that I was looking forward to most, because so much was subject to regulations, subject to regulations, subject to regulations. And of course, now we've seen the consultation actually published. So there's a little bit more meat on the bones of what the government is thinking about. What concerns me, if I'm being entirely frank, is the fact that government seems to have some preconditioned ideas of what they want out of the consultation. And whilst various ranges have been suggested in terms of what those kind of payments would look like for shift cancellations or variations or curtailment, what the notice period would be needed, what would be the minimum notice period would look like. And there again, there are ranges that have been proposed in the consultation papers, which is encouraging, but we're also getting a flavour of what government would like to see. And the averaging period that is being proposed in terms of the offer of guaranteed hours. So where somebody is on a 0 hours contract, but they regularly work a set number of hours, or a large number of hours more than 0, then there is, the proposal is that they will be offered, or the employer will need to offer them a guaranteed hours contract. And the reference period, which is of course subject to consultation and regulations, there is a range. 12 weeks is government's preferred. 26 weeks or 52 weeks is also available to respond to in the consultation. But what concerns me, and it was really picking up on what was in the employer bulletin, was that the 12 weeks seems to be not a definite cert because it's in the consultation, but almost a sort of it's believed it's going to be 12 weeks. And that kind of, for me, poses a question on the whole purpose of the consultation. There are a lot of proposals, a lot of questions in this 0 hours, particularly what defines as late notice, who has the right to those contracted hours, and in particularly where there are shift cancellations, who doesn't have the right to the shift cancellation payments, and what those payments will be based on. Will they be a percentage or will they be an average? I think I probably said both things there. But I think this consultation, if people, if the audience here today hasn't taken a look already at the 0 hours consultation, and does actually have employees on their payroll who work under 0 hours contracts, I would urge you to take a look and consider the implications of the proposals on your workforce, or maybe on your clients if you're a bureau. So that's me. Sorry, there was, as I say, there was a lot of detail there.
Yeah, it goes a little bit further as well, because obviously it's agency as well. So it's quite an expansive group. And I guess there are also quite a lot of questions about the logistics of the solution. If you join a company on a casual contract or a 0 hour contract, at what point in time is the decision made that you're not? Because if we're talking about having a 12-week period of review, would you have to wait 12 weeks before you could make that decision? James, I'm not sure whether that's in it, because I haven't read, because obviously it came out on the 2nd of June, didn't it? The consultation. I haven't finished reading it. But in principle, it's quite a lot of logistical control. And as you said, Sam, when it comes to the late shift change, what are the parameters of that? Is it X number of days? Is it X number of situations? Is there going to be some form of policing?
And more importantly, are there any exemptions? So, for example, if you're getting short notice specifically because somebody's off sick and you're required to cover their shift, would that be exempt from the short notice payments?
Well, I think so, but I think the bigger deal was more about short-term cancellation as well, isn't it? What creates that? Yes. Oh, sorry, we thought so and so wasn't going to be here, but now they are. So you don't need to come in. but I think again, it's a very hard piece of legislation to police.
Well,
because
there
it
are
is
two.
very, very grey.
Yeah, there are two ends of the problem, aren't there? Here, so there are those that are actually genuine casual labour and quite like that sort of stuff. If I refer to groups of people where that may apply, university students taking in or getting some jobs for the weekend, but the following weekend they want to go off clubbing or go and see a concert, but they're a bit short of money, so they want that sort of environment. Unfortunately, I think when we talk about 0 hours generally in the space of recruitment, we talk purely as if they're all those types of workers, whereas from the Office of National Statistics, we know that the average number of hours worked by a 0 hours worker across the UK is 21 hours every week. So the counter argument there is, why are they 0 hours if they're working at least 21 hours a week? And I think you've got two scenarios happening with 0 hours, but 0 hours has probably been seen as, for the one hand, the students beneficial because they get a bit more spending money and they can afford to go and see the latest group at the O2. Whereas for the other, they're dependent on paying rent, feeding the family, etc. It's kind of used as a means to curtail the workforce when it's not needed, yet they have no job security. And so this is why they're kind of coming in. But there's an element of, does it balance between the two? And I don't know. And then you've got events. So event will happen once and once only. So you've got, I don't know, going back some years, Manchester City playing Peterborough in the cup match. They've then brought in a whole load of people to line the pitch, this, that and the other, deal with food, etc. But when's the next time Man City's going to go to Peterborough? Probably in 15 years' time. So it's a once-off thing only. Sorry for going back to football. And it kind of goes that way. So where's the balance? So I think that's what this consultation is really trying to cover. But at the moment, it's seen as exploitative or one-sided flexibility. So it's portrayed as being two-sided and that the individual wants flexibility. But I think they're finding that a majority of these workers actually didn't want that flexibility because it doesn't work in their favor. It works against them. Yeah, plus we've had outlawed some years ago under the Liberal leader, as it were, and the coalition, when he was the relevant minister, got rid of exclusivity clauses, which some 0 hours contracts had at the time. Is, we'll take you and give you an hour here and there when we feel like it, but you can't work for anybody else. And if we phone you up and tell you you've got to work, you do. That went. So that sort of protection has come in, and this is looking at the next stage, isn't it? So I think it's interesting and people should get involved, especially if you have this type of worker. And I guess that goes with the first question we've had today as well, Steve, in relation to SSP. And that was one of the considerations of the SSP working group in the DWP, because originally there was consideration of, under new SSP law, whether they made opening days qualifying days, but they decided to leave the legislation alone and have it that the employer agrees the qualifying days, subject to minimum of 1. That's Wednesday if you can't agree what it is. And so that sort of come into play. But the 12 weeks is interesting, isn't it? Because there could be an element of thinking, is this my right as a 0 hours worker to say, come on, mate, I've been working 15 hours a week for you for the past 20 weeks. I want you to contract me 15 hours. I have a right to that request. Whereas at the moment, the proposal is actually, it's got nothing to do with the worker. The employer, if it happens, has to contact me and offer the hours. And it's sort of, so it's not my requesting a right, it's an obligation. The challenge with the obligation is the employer then has to work it out constantly, and it rolls. So you've kind of got this new measure and calculation you're having to do to think, oh, has someone triggered that I have to offer them? If not, I'm in trouble and I could potentially be prosecuted or enforced or I don't know whether this would come under the Fair Work Agency or not, but somebody might turn up and start looking at everything else as well, as including holiday and national minimum wage. So there's an element of thinking, is it? Now, if this started out as a right, if I've got a right to request it, that kind of sits well with me. But as an obligation on an employer, I've now got to monitor and offer this university student these hours when actually they don't really want them, because the impetus is on the employer to tell the employee, here's the offer, and then the right to deny it is the employees, isn't it? To say, no, I don't want that. But interesting.
There's some drawing from other bits of policy here as well. So we've got that initial reference period of the 12 weeks is the government preferred option, as it says in the consultation. They've also got options to answer for 26 weeks, 52 weeks or other. I think my initial thought maybe is, could 26 weeks work quite nicely with the sort of 6-month period for unfair dismissal. I don't know whether those could be aligned in some way, but just to sort of flag, there's also going to be a subsequent reference period, which looks like it could work very similar to how re-enrollment works for automatic enrollment, where you have the obligation not only to assess the person and automatically enroll them at the start of their employment, but every 2 years you would have to re-enroll those individuals to make sure that they're still aware of their rights to a workplace pension. This looks like it's going to potentially be working in a similar way, but likely that next subsequent reference period could be up to a year long. But it would mean, as Simon was saying there, that you have this ongoing responsibility to make sure that you're assessing your worker, to make sure you're assessing should they be offered this contract. So it's not going to be a sort of one and done process. It's going to be a long-term obligation for which you're going to have to be able to have the data to hand to assess these individuals. And we may not be looking at just a reference period with or we may not just be looking at a time period in order to offer the contracts. There's proposals in there to look at time period plus hours worked, in which case you would need to have the records of the actual hours worked. So whether people will push back on the hours worked side of the equation, I would anticipate they would, but it's definitely a possibility there.
This is what I was going to raise. This is once again going to be one of those areas of this will fall under HR, or it should fall under HR in as far as those. But of course, the payroll element is usually going to be what's the average pay, or what if that comes into it. But with the average hours, but you're quite right, Matthew. This is the bit when I had this with of hang on, here we go again. Hours worked. This is the problem with national minimum wage. Hours worked versus hours paid. Payroll can only give you what's been paid. It has no idea, and neither does it really care, putting it bluntly, what somebody has worked. Now, clearly, the employer needs to care for national wage and everything else that goes with it. But this is what concerns me: is once again they're using language that they don't understand, and they don't understand what the ramifications are for this. Because if they're going to go with hours worked, what is that? And where does your time off in lieu come? Where do all, obviously with 0 hours, they probably shouldn't have time off in lieu. But then, what happens with all of this? So this is where I think the consultation just opens up a huge can of worms. And for anybody, particularly as the first person who asked the question, if you've got 0 hours workers, you really, really need to look at this and either contribute directly to the consultation, or if you're a member of a representative body such as CIPP or ICW, what have you, is make sure that you're contributing to it. But that's where my concern is, the practicality of where this comes in. And I find it interesting that if you take holiday pay is 52 weeks or back up to the 104, and yet they're using this as 12 weeks, which they got rid of for holiday pay. And now we're looking at, 26 weeks throwing in the mix. Are they confusing that perhaps with maternity for qualifying, or what was once upon a time? Who knows? It just as if random weeks have come in. But I think the 12 weeks is probably sort of fair. But again, it goes against all the other pieces of legislation. So if we can make it more confusing for employers to follow, why wouldn't we? And I'm also with Simon, I think, here on this of being on the employer as an obligation to constantly, well, not constantly, if there is a time period of when they have to review it again. And of course, what happens if the employee then says, actually, I want you to look at my contracted hours, so if the employer is having to do this, they make a decision, the employee says, no, thank you, I want this, where is the boundary of, oh, actually, I've changed my mind? So I think there's a lot of play. It'll be interesting to see because it closes in August, doesn't it? This one, is it August?
Yeah, it does. 25th of August.
I mean, so nice timing right over the summer period. Well, where I live and looking out the window, I wouldn't exactly call this summer, as you can see with the jumper. But good. Yeah, we'll see where this goes. But I think it'll be an interesting one to watch, and then that partnership between HR and payroll is going to be, once again, really fundamental of who's going to do what here.
No,
and as
indeed.
a bureau, an agency, even more confusing. Let's watch this space.
I'd say, but you've then got summer or temporary staff, so seasonals, who could well be treated differently. Umbrella businesses is another one that really has to be considered, because of their possible model of using staff or putting staff out, again, could be different to agencies. So I think there's quite a lot of, I guess, bandwidth, shall we say, to this whole thing.
Yeah, it's quite. I mean, it. Oh, sorry, Simon.
That's all right.
It is a meaty document, and I think it largely because it takes account of employers who are directly employing 0 hours work or workers on a 0 hours contract, as well as agencies. There are sets of questions for both. There's a nice little kind of, if you don't need to answer the agency one, you can move on. I'm sure Matthew has to answer all of them when he was looking at the paper.
But then also, Sam, with the agency, who's going to take the responsibility? Is it going to be the employer who's got the agent staff, or is it pushed back to the agency? So I think,
Usually it gets pushed back to the agency, by the way.
You'd think so.
Well, legally, most documents I've been signing, you sense check it, and really the culprit, we have to be very, very careful because we're seen as the end employer and we approach it that way.
Yes.
So it's.
But then it could be, but then it could be the employer of the agency staff who has shortcut the duties of the staff or cancelled the.
It gets complicated, particularly when you have umbrella in between, but then legislation and sort of monitoring of umbrella has tightened a lot this year anyway. So a lot of our, say we supply to a big pharmaceutical, for example, and they will tell us that there's only certain umbrella companies that we can use in that supply chain. But really, it usually ends up with the agency at the end, even with the umbrella in there.
But then if you're looking at the short cancellation of shift, that will be the employer who's cancelling the agency shift.
Well, you'd have to change the agreements, wouldn't you? Because the agency would be at risk. So they'll have to know if you've cancelled the staff, you still have to pay a percentage of the agreement, even though you're reneging. But Matthew's comment was interesting on the 26-week side and the 6 month, because potentially there's an element of, is this going to be open to abuse on a 12-week to the extent of, well, I've got to offer you 20 hours, but if you accept it, you're sacked, because potentially they have, well, within certain boundaries, no comeback on taking an unfair dismissal claim until they've actually worked for 6 months. So there's that risk, whereas I guess 26 weeks, if you've got to make that offer, there is no risk of, there is a risk of unfair dismissal because the individual can take a complaint. But you know what I mean, it's sort of the protection is there for the individual. Whereas I guess sometimes there's an element of when you exercise rights as an employee, you could be out of the door.
Yeah, and I think that's where potentially my mind was. Where are the behavioural impacts of having these reference periods where they are, in terms of companies using things like that to dismiss people, to say, actually, we didn't really want to offer you this, but now we've had to and now we want to get rid of you. There's also maybe a sort of point as to what Karen was saying. If you've got all these different reference periods and trigger dates that you need to keep a track of, where possible, aligning those dates or time periods can be quite beneficial for sort of understanding your processes as an employer. You know, if we understand that at 6 months or 26 weeks or whatever you might need to align those as, that's when your protection from unfair dismissal kicks in, that's when your right to a guaranteed hours contract kicks in. That creates that sort of trigger point where you need to think through more of this sort of employment particulars about employing an individual. It's either a day one right or it's a 6 month right. And at the moment, we've got all these different rights, all these different trigger points, as Karen was saying, that they just sort of look, what trigger points do we use? 12 weeks, 26 weeks, or 52 weeks. Let's just choose one of them and throw it in there.
There's another thing there, Matthew, on behaviour of it could be that the individual at 12 weeks, 6 months, whatever it is, thinks, no, I'm not ready. I don't want a contract at this point in time, which might mean the employer, but then somebody else could be at that point when they say, yeah, I'll have a contract, which then might mean that there's less hours potentially for that individual that says, no, thank you. So there's also sort of that element as a, you know, if you've got team people in a bank, and I'm thinking of my sister here is a midwife, and they have bank staff that come into the hospital. You know, so if they get, because it's a trigger that the employer must do, that employer thinks, well, actually, we know over the last 6 months we do need. So actually, it's a good thing for us because we're sort of viewing this as it's a negative thing for employers. It could be a positive for employers where they can't actually get individuals to agree to a contract of hours, which always leaves them in a state of flux of, are we going to have the shift covered or are we not? So this actually could go the other way, which is they say, right, okay, these people are willing to actually, yeah, they do want to have a contract of these hours and the guaranteed, which then means, well, actually, we don't need these 0-hour contracts anymore. So it could shift in a different way as well. I don't know which way it'll go, but it could.
Yeah. That's just some thoughts. It's because I think obscurely, Steve, but I was thinking that Karen and I, even Richard at times, have been unpaid careers with HMRC panels and things like that because they don't pay us, but we've been doing them for years, sort of thing. But the other consultation area, I guess, was thinking of that because they're thinking of bringing in protections for those who've, I don't know, mum or dad gone into dementia, going to have to care for them. I've got to give up my job. What do I do? But or the children's sick, etc. Of bringing in protections for those types of people, so they'll have a right potentially to return to a job after a period of time. So it's quite. I think you can empathise with the reasons for it as a person and think, but there's an element of then you're, along with maternity, then having to think about people and planning and their rights. So that's another consultation that's open that is worth looking at and reviewing and seeing what the obligation is. I don't think there's any pay due with this, but there is a right to return. Although potentially in the future they could even look at other types of statutory payment maybe for those types of cases, because increasingly we're finding people having to care, probably more so than we did years and years ago, or the family dynamics have changed because of society has changed in its attitudes.
I think it's interesting that it goes on to the employer to pay for that care, and I think this is where, without a view of my own, because there's also at the moment, is there not a petition for paid paternity leave to go to 6 weeks at 90%? And so if I put a business hat on now, so taking away, I empathise absolutely, but if I put a business hat on, you're increasing the costs for business to actually employ people who may not be there, albeit for good reason and protection, but ultimately they haven't got people to do the work, to make the widgets or to do what have you. So there has to be, you know, and it'll be interesting to see how all of this pans out, all of these consultations, because at the end of the day, the business can't be busy, can't be paying for everybody to have some form of statutory something and no workers.
I think an interesting point there is, if we said that this is more frequent, is obviously it ties into an aging workforce for a start, but also you could feed into ageism there as well, because if someone's looking to hire and someone is more likely to be an unpaid carer, that could feed into that as well. I mean, I've seen it in experience. Not
Yeah, well, it took
myself,
more than
but like,
20 years for women to be able to, with all due respect, to go to work and not of a, what was it, a childbearing age, was the language used back then. And there were, unfortunately, many employers who did not want to employ women of
yeah,
childbearing age.
Yeah. No,
Are we
indeed.
going to have to ban people from asking the question, are both your parents alive?
Well, I mean, that's a
Yeah.
good point. And not just that, but are you a grandparent? Because, you know, we're now in a society where, you know, you could be of an age where you've got parents who are still alive but needing care and support, and you've got grandchildren who are very much alive, and your children need support with helping them. So it comes in a whole kind of range of packages. What's interesting about the unpaid carers consultation is it is a consultation, but it's like they're looking to gather, the government in this case is looking to gather evidence rather than make specific proposals. I think what will come after this is then we'll start seeing proposals. And yes, absolutely, they've picked up on, should it be a bit longer than a 1 week unpaid, and should it be paid? But there's no hint that government will actually, you know, recover, cover that amount in the same way that they do statutory family payments. What rate should it be? Should it be like SSP, which is fully funded by the government and next to nothing in the amount, or should it be more kind of like statutory family leave payments? So it asks a lot of questions, but it looks like it's trying to seek an idea. So it's not too unpopular when it comes out with proposals, maybe. I don't know. Again, I think I've woken up with a skeptical head on me. So, but can I just finish off, because Simon touched on this. With the 0 hours, the obligation will be on the employee to kind of go to an employment tribunal if their rights aren't being met, whatever those final rights are. But there is talk towards the end of the consultation about maybe the Fair Work Agency getting involved, where the payments for short notice cancellations haven't been made. So this is a consultation that I think people do need, if they are in that position, to take very seriously, because I think there could be very real world impacts for them, particularly if the Fair Work Agency get involved.
One final point, just to sort of dive into maybe the nerdy side of it. We've obviously got late notice payments and what those payments are going to be. I don't think the consultation really dives into the sort of treatment of those payments from a is it earnings, is it not earnings point of view, which I think could be sort of quite an interesting question for many things. But I'm thinking of things in terms of the question through to our advisory service. People are going to be asking, does this get factored into holiday pay? Does it get factored into pensionable pay, and all those sort of fun questions that are going to arise when you have these really weird payments going through the payroll.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys. I think we've done justice to consultations there today, so appreciate it. A really nice note, the question that we had about SSP wasn't to do with their work, it was to do with their son. Who is so I think we've done good there, guys. That's really helped. The person thought they were going mad, had reference from PQT before, and we've backed it up. So not all heroes wear capes, guys. Yeah. So and before, we've got questions coming through, so before we go through to Summer, one for the panel, when is mandatory ethnicity pay gap coming into force?
I had a look at this. Yeah. No, I had a look at this last week. Whether or not you've got something more up to date, Matthew, I don't know. But when I'd looked last week, it was still at the point of they had not decided when this would be from.
If at all, yes. So the expansion of gender pay gap reporting, which has gone very quiet, I personally think. We don't really hear much about it. Equally with the reporting of worked hours on pay slips and stuff like that, it's gone very quiet. I don't know if it happens or not, but it's a legal requirement. The expansion of gender pay gap reporting is the menopause action requirements that come in. Voluntary this year, compulsory next year. So I think these are kind of phasings, aren't they? So if you said, when's ethnicity coming in? Not before 28.
I think the big challenge there, though, isn't it, with the ethnicity one, is when I look through this, is the individual has the right to refuse to give. So
Yes.
how do you enforce that on an employer for compliance if they actually haven't got the data? And I wonder if that's why at the moment, earliest is 2028, is that what they've said, but with no date, because I'm not sure any government could actually enforce this without enforcing an individual to declare what their ethnicity is. Whereas gender, of course, it's something we have to declare to HMRC. Whether people agree with what that is another matter, but that's a requirement. So I think I think they've got a bit of a sticky wicket in as far as how would they make that work.
Yeah, if you Google ethnicity pay gap reporting, the consultation itself has a little banner on it that says this was published under the 2022-2024 Sunak Conservative government, which usually means the quiet part out loud is that we don't really care about this because it was the last government. However, there is another press release from on gov.uk that says the government commits to gender pay to ethnicity reporting. However, it doesn't give a date.
So in answer, no time soon.
Yeah.
Perfect enough. Thank you, guys. Okay, time to move to summer. Although Karen, you're not feeling it, I apologise.
As I've got my fan on, I'm feeling it way too much.
Yeah, mine's called a sunbed at the gym, just to even look like I've got some colour.
Well, let's head into summer anyway. And I think so. For many organisations, the next few months are going to bring some unique challenges. As we mentioned, on top of the usual, we have World Cup impacts. Interestingly, my son was told that he could go in at 9:45 this morning by the school. So I think the teachers were enjoying that. No reflection on people having a full-time job. But anyway, that was that. We also have SSP considerations, holiday requests, absence management, and the Fair Work Agency development. So I think there's a really, before I forget, on the BBC, there's a really good planner for when the games are and what times they are if you're monitoring. So they created a little tool there if anyone wanted to have a pop over to the BBC and have a look. Other TV channels are available, but anyway, there we go, that's there. World Cup impacts. I don't know if someone wants to lead on this at the moment.
Well, I had a question for you, Steve. Was the concession for the benefit of the pupils or the benefit of the teachers?
Immediately my thought. And also I know my son's teacher is a mad Arsenal fan, and they did open. They did say that they would open, but they wouldn't be teaching them before 9:45.
Also, more of an issue for Scotland because all their games don't.
So they got a bank holiday.
Scottish games don't start till 11 o'clock the next day.
This is that big banner, yeah.
But it is a consideration. I don't know if anybody's noticed it, and it's kind of a monitor it, because I guess we've only had one Scottish game and one English game. English game wasn't too bad. Timing wise, the Scottish worse, but have people started to see people going sick? And equally, there's a tendency to start partaking of various lawful substances, which might result in a little bit of tiredness or strange activity the following morning. So there's an element of, does that affect sick pay, which I guess is one of the reasons there. But equally, I guess, are we inundated with holiday requests to cover World Cup days? I always fear sometimes, because even historically, is when they pan onto the crowd, where suddenly individuals appear that apparently are sick or broken their leg or something and are supposed to be at home, but now they're actually in Atlanta or wherever, or Dallas or Orlando.
Let's hope they're not with another partner, Simon.
Well, you have that as well, yes.
Oh dear. Now, hang on, I don't think we've got that on the agenda, Karen.
It was more because of the crowd fanning, and of course with what happened on YouTube.
Well, I guess there's also the whole aspect of people actually proactively managing this.
Yeah.
So it brings in a very different scenario now, where it's about time planning, time management, you know, who goes, who doesn't go. You know, if you've got a team of 6 and 4 of them who ask for a holiday on the same day because England are playing, then how do you manage that as well? You know, what is the direction you take? Because not everybody is going to be reactive to having some legal substances, like Simon says. It is going to be preempted. So
Yeah, and whilst I think we've done the new rules for statutory sick pay pretty much to death since April, the reason I put this forward was just because that 4-day period of incapacity to work, which would have kicked in previously, no longer exists. So somebody who's been turned down for holiday, for example, might ring in sick the day after a match. You know what I mean? How does the employer evidence or prove that they are not incapable of work? I mean, I think it's fair to assume, but if it's a qualifying day, then they would be eligible for statutory sick pay in a way that in the previous World Cup they wouldn't have been, unless they were off for a much longer period of time. So it's like you say, Richard, it's about managing SSP absence for sickness, making sure you have those return to work conversations, so that it just slightly kind of makes people pause and think, do I want to ring in sick? Oh no, I'm going to have to face Karen when I go back, and she's going to grill me as to why I rang in sick the day after an England match. I mean, I'm fortunate, because I don't do football, but it could happen. And so, but making sure that there is a very clear and thoroughly active management policy of sickness absence, I think, is going to be particularly important in the coming weeks and months.
Or of course, they could just have somebody like me who doesn't even know when they're playing, so wouldn't even twig that that's why somebody got sick.
well, it gets harder obviously as the tournament goes on, because
Yeah.
it becomes a reactive thing. But if somebody does ask for holiday, you've already got 4 people off and you say no, and they then go off sick, how are you going to deal with that?
Yes.
Especially
Well,
coming back to that very first question about qualifying day. If that qualifying day and it's somebody who is 0 hours and they were due to work that day and go sick, that's a week's pay potentially, or a week's SSP rather, not a week's pay.
Of course, we've got annual events, thinking about the holidays, and we're coming up to that summer. So we used to have a lady who was an avid Wimbledon follower, always put herself in for the auction. Well, an auction, it's not an auction, is it? Lottery for the tickets for centre court, etc. And invariably got them reasonably regular because she's a member. You get groups of that, and Steve, I'm just thinking there's things like Henley, there's cricket, there's other stuff of how we manage those sorts of things. Sometimes I think we can embrace them as employers and employment for the benefit of all, can't we? Because it can also give a positive swing and mood, especially where there's success. But I guess I'm thinking our original direction, because it's got the Fair Work Agency. The Fair Work Agency is a conglomeration of various government agencies that did employment law enforcement. The particular one that probably impacts us most at the moment is national minimum wage that we can think of. But the teams for the Fair Work Agency have rapidly trained up on the other aspect of holiday pay. And I think it's widely known that holiday pay is invariably wrong. To the extent that they'll say statistically 1.7 million employees are denied their holiday pay rights, and you've probably got another 7 or 8 million, I think it is, from the report that was out, and I can't remember what it was called. Was it the Working Lives report from about 6 weeks ago, that shows about 8 million of them are wrong. So they may be getting holiday pay, but it's not the right holiday pay. And various other things. And the Fair Work Agency expands their coverage and expand their powers. So before, it was an element of, if I'm not happy, the employer could say, well, what are you going to do about it, Simon? And there's an element of, I've had to go ACAS, lodge a claim, get them to agree, give me a number, start taking it through the employment tribunal process within I don't know, an element of months. And if I didn't, it used to be 3, now I think it's 6 from memory. If I didn't, then I was out of time. Whereas now we've got the Fair Work Agency that will come in, and they don't care what my opinion is. If they see my record and I've been underpaid, they'll issue a notice to the employer potentially requiring it to be paid. Or I don't need to take them to an ET because the Fair Work Agency will take them to court potentially. And I think that's probably coming down to realism of that's not individual cases. I think that's where they've got a number of cases that they'll prosecute the employer for failure to meet their duties. But we're aware, I think some of us are aware, that the Fair Work Agency or the HMRC National Minimum Wage team have all been trained on how to look at holiday pay requirements. And there are only three legal types. That's average 5.6 weeks, average 52 weeks over 104, or accrual of hours for irregular and part-year workers, or rolled up holiday pay for irregular hours workers. But I think if you look at it, there'll be a load of other schemes that employers operate which don't align with any of those schemes as set out in the working time regulations. However, they may be okay because they're more, but many won't be for some circumstances, and so there is risk. So it's just thinking of, we're probably dreaming here of warmer days rather than cold days, Karen, but it is a little warm down here in the south today, but it could be better. Although I'm looking forward to our traditional August, where is it Cornwall and Devon flood, and it pours with rain for 6 weeks. Usually the day after school breaks up, isn't it? Until the day you return, and then it turns back to sunshine. But that's just how I remember summers as a boy. But I think it's an element of, as employers, we need to audit our schemes, even if it's to say they're good, but they are complex subjects, and it's worth looking at just to have that confirmation, because you've got this new agency coming in with powers, and we don't want to be named and shamed.
No. Thank you so much. Okay, so before we go through to the poll, which is around summer, there's a question came in. I'm not sure if we can answer it, but how can we check fit notes haven't been forged or altered by employees when doctors are only issuing electronic versions? Anything on that?
Yes, it's a tough one, isn't it? Yeah, they could
see how you can, other than calling the GP to see did they issue it, and then under GDPR would they actually be able to tell you that they're patient confidentiality? Could they tell you that they issued it? I think you just have to
probably not.
So yeah, I wouldn't know how to.
Or occupational health, they called in to do some sort of monitoring.
Possibly,
Yes.
I mean, that actually is an interesting question, but it also reminds me that there is currently a pilot scheme running 4 different areas, and I can't remember which. I know Lancashire and Carlisle.
One of them's ours.
Are one of them that kind of explores the fit note and how the fit note can be used betterly is not a right word, sorry, more effectively in that whole, because it was introduced to replace the medical certificate that previously said you're not fit for work, to say you are fit for work because work is good for us, but maybe under certain circumstances. And I think it's maybe being deemed as it's not working as effectively as it was hoped it would. So there are 4 pilot areas running at the moment that are encouraging GPs to be a little bit more proactive in how they complete. Now, forgive me because I haven't looked at the detail of how this is going to work. I think there's a question in GPs' minds as to whether or not this is just going to be more work to no result. But the idea is to make them more effective in bringing people back into the workplace, and therefore preventing them from being off long-term sick and then moving on to benefits.
There's a bit though in there that I haven't found the detail, but not because I only came across this just the other day, and I forwarded it to our own people team to say, have you seen this? Given that Lancashire and Cumbria are one of the areas, But one of them, the thing that was alarming me was, and I didn't see the time frame for this, is what they were saying is in order to have a return to work, there would have to be a three-way conversation when it was long term after, and it implied like at the moment 7 days, but I'm not saying it is that, so please don't quote me on that. But the way we're looking at it is we would view, for example, long-term sick as 28 days or more. That's our policy at Armstrong Watson. I think a lot are similar. But what it was then saying is when somebody triggers that, whatever date that do, whether they stipulate what that needs to be or what, is then there would have to be a three-way conversation that would involve the employer, some form of occupational health provided by the government, whatever that might look like, and the employee. And I'm thinking, can you imagine trying, depending on the size of your company, operating three ways and what have you? So I understand that they're trying to encourage more people back to work. I'm not so sure. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what the pilot shows, of course, but I would challenge how employers are going to fit that in, as well as everything else that they're trying to do and monitor. Most employers, I would argue, do have a good return to work policy. So this is once again perhaps a sledgehammer to them, or it's particular employers. I don't know, but again, I'm putting the business hat on here of businesses are going to have to follow, depending on, say, how the pilot goes. But I couldn't see at what point that was triggered. I say for us, long-term sick is 28 days. So whether they'll stipulate what long-term sick is, I don't know.
There was one more question on SSP. Someone asked if it's still reclaimable from employers. They thought that had stopped.
No, you can't.
No, not since COVID.
I think it was just something that slipped up earlier when I think, Sam, you meant to say it's fully paid by the employer.
Yeah,
Instead
sorry.
of government.
Did I say government?
That's pretty good. You did.
But forgive me. It's been one of those.
The opposite way.
But I wonder if that's where that's come from. So yeah.
Oh,
yes.
oh well, thank you for
that's
not correcting me.
That's all right. We thought no one would notice. The other thing, the old sick note, I don't know if they use it on the fit note, but on the old sick note, there used to be a couple of classifications where a doctor would give you a sick note and you would take it to your employer, but it actually indicated to the work you weren't sick. Predominantly because the doctor didn't want to get bumped on the nose. So there were a couple of classifications. Some of them were a bit casual. So one from memory was STL, I think. So or NADS. NAD was the other one. So you could say, oh, look, the doctor says I'm ill, I've got NADS disease. NAD means no abnormality detected. In other words, they're not sick at all. And I think the other one was swinging the leg. So if you had swinging the leg disease, it meant you weren't sick. But quite often a doctor would issue them because they didn't want to get their room vandalized or family threatened. But actually,
because it has changed, because principally now the doctor can say you can go back to work now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're under the pressure from the individual who's going to say, well, I don't want to go back to work now.
Correct.
So
which is one of the reasons why I guess doctors don't like them.
Dream to my doctor then, who at one point a long time ago I was poorly, and they said, we'll give you a sick note. I said, please don't do that, otherwise I really, really will be sick. Don't do that to me. I want to go to work.
Thanks, guys. Should we move through to the poll?
Yeah. Yes.
And summer-based poll coming up. I've got it in front of me yet. Okay, so how will your business approach the World Cup? So option 1, allowing flexible hours. Number 2, allowing annual leave. Encouraging office viewings might be difficult. Or, well, it depends on your business, I suppose. Or ignore it and business as usual. If everyone wants to take a vote on that and just pretend it's not happening, but those are the options.
I remember going into school to watch one of the World Cups. I think it might have been 2002 was Japan, was it? So it was like first thing in the morning. It was like going in at like 6:30.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've probably got lots of employers that are 24 hours these days, so they could be all sorts of shifts coming in and out. You know,
there's going to be a lot of phones hidden by computers, different places, and headphones in.
I think you just embrace it. But I mean, I remember 2002. I was in the city, and it was a big company, and they had a lot. Everyone just went in, and there were a lot of screens. But yeah, I mean, but I also think there's also a fairness question here, right? Because what if you just don't watch football and you're doing all of this stuff with someone who, do you know what I mean? It's not me, but I can imagine I would, if it was me, I'd be aggrieved. You know, it's like, oh, they're coming in at 10, don't worry, but can you just get that payroll run while they're not here? So there's a lot of different things to consider, I think. So although I can see the numbers coming through there. While we're doing that, there was another question that came in. Let me run with it. What are your thoughts on tax changes in Wales and Scotland following the May elections? The Welsh government say they don't freeze plan to student loan threshold. How could this be done?
Well, with an element of difficulty on the plan too, but yes.
Wales has devolution powers for income tax, but I don't think it has much powers beyond that, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it can, I think, freeze the threshold. It needs to agree them, but I think that's sort of a joint agreement approach, isn't it, at the moment with student loans. So potentially, if they really wanted to motor ahead, they'd have to introduce another alternate plan type. But that would have to go through the motion of being developed and input.
Because a student loan company devolved? Because obviously it's the student loan company who gives the loans, isn't it?
Yes.
Are they devolved?
The plan 2 threshold, I believe, is
right. Okay.
Yes, or is it? Oh, yes. And I'm trying to remember. Yeah, the plan 2 threshold is devolved. So far they've always agreed, and I'd imagine even if there's an intent to change it for future, initially you think they would agree, because I sit on the consultation for student loans panel at HMRC. Well, it's joint with student finance, isn't it? And the I'm trying to remember who else it is, Department of Education, and it's something they consider, because the hint this year is they're wanting all the thresholds to be announced together. It's been an angst of the software development community, because last year we kind of had it in 3 tranches. And it's sort of, I just want to apply the change. I don't want to have to update it 3 different times. I just want to do it because they all change on April. But the indication they've hinted is they're trying to get it that everything is agreed together. I hope including Scotland. The reality may be different because Scotland control plan 4.
Here's your genie wish, Simon. You get them all at the same time, but they're on the 5th of April.
Well, that wouldn't be unusual, especially if it was 6 o'clock, Matt. I've known that before. You know, it used to be the thing, the COVID tradition of this program, as it were, because that's how we started, was dealing with all the COVID changes, is the announcement were always about 6:15 on a Friday, which meant that the civil servants could all go home and have a weekend. And we as payroll professionals then worked for the next 48 hours thinking, how the thump are we going to get this done for Monday? But no change there then.
Thank you, guys. I end and share the results. So huge,
interesting.
Huge emphasis on business as usual. I don't know if that's because of when the games are. I don't know, but yeah, because it's not in business hours. It might affect business hours. I mean, you can watch a game of football without going out and get blasted and not being able to work the next day, I think. So there's a responsibility there. But flexible hours.
I think the further England go through the tournament, though, the higher that risk becomes usually.
Yes.
And Scotland.
But they don't forget about our Scotland, you know. Don't dismiss them just yet.
We can forget about Scotland.
You're busy drinking New York Dry.
Well, they're the top point clubs, aren't they, at the moment? So
yeah. This is it, because it's like 3 go through really anyway, and even the yeah, so there's all to play for, and yes, as you say, we just don't know where we are until the business end, I don't think so. But annual leave, I mean, yeah, you're going to do that, but I think a lot of people are just waiting to see how it goes. So okay, so moving forward,
I think if I can just say, Steve, when Scotland and England are both in the final, which is that possible? Are they in different groups?
Well, yeah.
Then I think that, you know, even I might put my knitting down and actually make an effort to watch it.
I would be in a dilemma living with a Scotsman. I would be in a real dilemma and being Welsh. So
I think, if memory serves me, my wife was in hospital having given birth, and we were both there watching England Scotland on my phone in the hospital. So that was dedication to it. But we were both committed to it. It wasn't me forcing her after she'd just given birth.
I was going to say, Steve, are you sure it was both?
Yeah, it was genuinely. She's a big football fan. Otherwise, I would have sounded terrible. Moving on to P11Ds and PSA. Time of year again, hot topic, catches us all out. Deadlines, reminders, and common pitfalls, P11D requirements. Don't know who wants to lead on these.
So I confess, I mean, you know, anybody listening will probably be thinking, of course we know this, Sam, shut up. So the 6th of July, of course, is for submission of the P11Ds for those employers who haven't gone down the payrolling route, or maybe partially gone down the payrolling route, and also the P11DBs, which of course report on the Class 1A contributions that are due. Any Class 1A contributions that need to be paid over, of course, need to be paid over by the 19th or the 22nd of July, whether paying by cheque or online. And of course, PSAs are slightly different submission deadline. Whilst the agreement now for a pay-as-you-earn settlement agreement is enduring, so there would only be the need for a submission by no later than the 5th of July if there were to be a change to an enduring agreement or an employer were making it for the first time. But then they don't have to pay over any Class 1B NICs that fall due until October. And again, the 19th if paying by post, and the 22nd if I did say October, didn't I? I suddenly started doubting myself. I did say October. If paying electronically, and of course to be eligible to be captured within a pay-as-you-earn settlement agreement, which is due on expenses or benefits in kind that the employer agrees to settle the tax and NICs that might be due on behalf of their employees, the expense or benefit in kind has to be minor, irregular, or impracticable. I love that word, impracticable to operate. And the example I once heard many, many years ago, and it stuck with me, it's nothing to do with buses, you'll be pleased to hear. It was a box of Mars bars. So, you know, staff canteen, there's a box of Mars bars there, and whenever it's empty, the employer fills it up again. It would be totally impracticable to try and estimate what value each employee has had. Has Matthew eaten all of them, or has he left some for everybody else? So, you know, so in that instance, that box of Mars bar, probably a bowl of fruit would probably be more an accurate reflection these days, but that could be covered in a PSA. Company cars cannot be covered in a PSA. That much I do know, even if they are irregular. Okay, because they're not mine. I'll shut up now.
Fantastic. There's been a reminder in the employer's bulletin on the payments because they want a different reference for the Class 1A payment than other normal. So they're obviously receiving a lot of Class 1A payments against the wrong payment reference. So I'm finding with a lot of employers coming with misbalances on their accounts that when we look into that, they haven't done their P11D declaration, so they've received a £100 penalty. They're receiving interest on the penalty. They may have done it eventually. They've paid their Class 1A, but it's showing the Class 1A hasn't been paid, and it keeps on carrying forward the Class 1A amount to the next tax month because it thinks it's there for that debt. So I think it's just look at the employer bulletin on the correct referencing for Class 1A as well.
Also, in the employer bulletin, I noticed that they confirmed that the PSA mailbox will close. Now, it said it will close on the 29th of August, 2025. I think that's possibly a bit of a typo and should actually be the 28th of August
26.
2026. But I did email them using their email address to let them know this, but it just bounced back. I'd used the wrong email address, which is a very clever way of avoiding.
Well, I bumped into Paula yesterday, so yes.
So the other legacy problem with PSA is using the wrong reference number, because obviously it is different to your usual one, and if you put it against your usual one, it won't be put against the right account. So.
Yeah. Well, and I see a number of actually reporting the Class 1A against termination payment Class 1A on the FPS. Pan across, you can't do that.
Amazing.
Yeah. But maybe there's news on that for the future.
Moving swiftly on.
Yes, because we've got two more areas to cover before the end of the session. So over for our old friend payroll benefits in kind, I think.
Sure.
So what do we know? What's it looking like? Get prepared. Sounds quite dramatic.
So do you want me to take this one, Simon?
Yeah, take that, Matthew. Yeah.
So we now know that the mandatory payrolling of benefits in kind is going to be phased in 2 stages. So first, from April 2027, we're going to have phase 1, which is going to include cars, car fuel, vans, van fuel, and medical benefits. So the main reason around why those benefits is that covers around about 90 to 95% of the benefits offered to employees, and I think it's around about the same amount of employers covered by that who do offer benefits. So in terms of getting the most amount of people into mandatory payroll in the first instance, it's kind of beneficial for HMRC to do it that way. But what it does allow is that we don't have this sort of big bang moment of payrolling where everyone's transferred over to payrolling and everything has to go through there. We're still going to have the opportunity to submit via P11D if you wish, if you want that same retrospective process of assessing your benefits, understanding your tax basis, and then reporting at the end of the year. Or where we're probably going to see people move to is voluntary payrolling everything else. So we can still register to voluntarily payroll, and that will be all benefits apart from the 5 that we mentioned. And I anticipate that's where we're probably going to see people move to, just to sort of simplify the process, so you're not necessarily running a dual process with P11Ds and with payrolling. I do think there are some things that people will need to consider from a payroll operation standpoint as to what your processes look like, what benefits you offer. And I suppose that's where what this looks like in getting prepared comes in, is you need to understand your benefits provision, your position, what you're offering, and how you're going to collect that data in. You know, speak to your third-party providers, see how you're getting the data, and really sort of work to aggregate that data and make it available to everyone within your organisation who has this responsibility. You know, touching back on something Karen said earlier, is this HR or rewards responsibility? Is this payroll's responsibility? And I think, to be maybe trite about it, the answer is yes. It's kind of everyone's responsibility. HMRC is not changing.
Yes.
Or your tax departments, exactly, if you're sort of payroll bureau. But the important thing to note is that HMRC is not changing who is responsible for assessing your benefits within your organisation. They are changing the way it is reported, and those are different things. They are in some ways agnostic in how your business processes work in the background. They care about the end result, that reporting. So make sure that your business is set up to be able to get that end result to the payroll department. So really focus on your data.
Now, some will say, go on. Well, some will say we're doing that already. So what's changed? But I think there's an element of what has changed is those 3 or those 5 are now separated out from the current payrolling. So at the moment, there are 2 payrolling values that are reported, which is the sum of all the taxable benefits year to date, the sum of all taxable benefits this time. They're not separate. They're all reported as one total. So you may have them separate in your payroll, but they're reported as a total. From April 27, cars, vans, and medical will have their own reporting totals. If you're reporting other things, they're still just lumped together as other or etc. as one lump of voluntary payroll benefits. The other aspect is you may say, well, we're already reporting the cars, so we're getting the data. But there are 3 new fields potentially. I'm hoping to argue against them, Matthew, with the policy people, and we'll see where it goes. But at the moment, they're indicating that they additionally want to know the price of accessories not included in the price of the car. That's a new field that isn't reported currently. Capital contributions made by the employee towards the cost of a car or accessories. That's a new field not currently reported. And the amount paid by employees towards private use of car. Now, I don't think they need that, because I think they just need the calculated price. That's my personal opinion. I may not win on that, but that'll be the argument I'll have with HMRC, because that's what you report now. But that isn't what you're currently anticipating being reported from April 27. So there will be subtle changes. And in relation to medical, again, I'm going to argue against it. They're asking the cost to the employer of amount foregone, and that independent of the benefit amount. And then there's elements of fuel. The vans is fairly straightforward to deal with. There are just a field for benefit year to date, fuel benefit year to date. So there are subtle differences between April, and we know that there's going to be a new structure in April 28, which is different to that already indicated. So they brought in 143, I think it is, fields from memory. They've dropped 125 of them. They'll now bring in a new structure after some consultation with the industry on what's best. And Matthew will know, because he's heard it loads of times at meetings, and it's stored to my strap line. I don't want to have to provide the neighbour's dog's DNA sample, and not everyone has private planes, precious metals, and timeshares. So why do I have to have them all on completely separate reporting fields, when absolutely I've got allowance, it's taxable, and it has a Class 1A liability. That's it. Just lump it together. But we'll see how it goes. But I think, as Matthew's saying, get ready now. From a payroll aspect, there's an element of look at that. I'm getting lots of tax people trying to give me P11D templates, and I'm really not interested in them. I want to know, what benefits do you have? Is it taxable, subject to Class 1 or subject to Class 1A? And benefits can be subject to one or the other, because credit and vouchers are Class 1. And because that's how the payroll config is, I'll worry about the reporting to HMRC on the FPS report, because I just want to know what benefit classification it is. In the case of cars, it's F, vans is G, and medical is I from memory. And then there's other classifications for other things. And my appeal to HMRC is to reveal a list of classifications. They kind of do, but they're not subdivided, is the challenge at the moment. So so how do you deal with the subdivisions that they may want? Yeah, go on.
No, after you.
Yeah, I'll go on forever. No, you carry on.
I was going to say as well, is, you know, not to forget that the way in which you calculate most benefits will not change. So your process and what have you now remains, and that's why I said you might use a tax team. Here at Armstrong Watson, you know, our clients, if they want tax advice as to what is it a benefit and how should it, whatever, you know, is it a car, is it a van, whatever, that will come from the tax team, the payroll process. But on that note, don't forget Class 1A is most likely to, you know, on cars and what have you, and that is likely reported in real time, although there will be, as Simon said, there will be much discussion that is needed to understand how we make this work, because then you've got the voluntary side of it. Because I would, with Matthew, you were saying about the rest might go, I agree with that, with the exception of accommodation and loans, because that legislation is not changing. So you're looking at putting through an estimate potentially, and then at the end of the year, having to recalculate. And don't forget, you know, if you go over it, it's like, well, if it's not right, how do you make that adjustment? And all these things will need to be answered. I'm very encouraged in the fact that they dropped all those fields, which I agree with Simon should never have been there in the first place. Because while you've got software trying to create those, as a bureau with an input sheet, can you imagine me going to a client with a column that says, is it a jet? Do you have timeshares? They would be thinking, what on earth are you asking me for that for? And then if they did do that, goodness knows what they'd have put in it that we would import in. So I think it's good news in there. Not so sure about Class 1A being part of it at this point, because then you've got voluntary or not voluntary. P11DBs, albeit loans and accommodation, are also Class 1A, so you'd have probably had that anyway. So I think a lot of discussion is going to need to be had around how we make this work. But I think we're all agreed that we want to make it work. It's just how do we do that? So good news in the fact that those fields are going to disappear. More work definitely to be done.
I think there's quite a lot of focus now for employers because of the, I guess, restriction down to just the cars, the vans and the thing. But obviously with the cars and the vans, they are possibly the highest labour required items because, you know, principally, you know, I've worked with car hire firms and their P11D, for instance, is an absolute nightmare. Because they have so many cars, so many moving parts, so many contracts that extend past the leave dates. So I think if there is a positive, it gives an employer the chance to really focus on them, because you've really got to say, right, what are we getting now? How effective is our reporting in real time of the cars in the fleet? How do I find out about the information where the car's going to last longer than the employee, blah, 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 blah. But then you've also got to remember with vans, it's a very, very different scenario in a lot of cases where we're talking about multiple drivers. So how good is my reporting of knowing who has had that van for X number of days in each month? Because in principle, it could be that you're dividing that charge down per person on the user. So I think the positive is, as Simon said, a lot less, I guess, adjustment to RTI in the first year, but also that focus now that you've got, if you have cars and vans, as to exactly what that process is going to look like for you and what can you, I guess, instigate to make it as real time as possible. Because what you don't want to have, and what's going to happen a lot, is the reporting going past April all the way up to July and no tax being reclaimed. So yeah, that's kind of where my head is.
Thank you, guys. I'm very mindful of time because we, as I said, we were very busy today and we've got one more slide to get through. So should we move through to deemed employment if everyone's happy on that?
That's great.
And it's a bit, there was one question actually, sorry, and it's a bit of a callback because it came in late. Do we think HMRC will ever get PSA data on the employer dashboard?
Yeah. I'm not aware of anything on the hints that I'm aware of them looking at it. I'm seeing other types of projects being instigated, but I can't recall this being on the roadmap of stuff we've seen at EPG on PSA data on the dashboard itself. But it's a reasonable suggestion probably because it settles up with the whole account. But at the moment, the PSA is separate or treated separate. So it's not treated as part of the whole lot because it kind of has its separate payment and reporting. So so they've not really mixed it in yet. And I'm not even heard of anything. I don't know if Karen's aware or Matthew co-chairs, although it's all new a little bit, isn't it, from the taker from Sam,
Not
or whether
heard
you've
anything.
heard anything.
Because of course it wouldn't link
Yes.
to the employee, a bit like Class 1A, really, isn't it?
Correct.
It's the employee wouldn't even
Class
know it was
1B.
happening. Yeah.
Yes. Also, because it's an enduring scenario, it doesn't fit in the same genre as everything else anyway.
Which for that, not heard anything.
Yes. It does seem to be a benefit for it to be, because it is actually completely separate whereas I think the Class 1A is mixed in with PAYE other things because it's associated with people. Is that fair?
Yeah, termination payments in particular.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. Mindful of time. IR35 changes, the umbrella market, scams and cons, and bills of exchange. So, I don't know if anyone wants to start
I think
on
for me, what the only thing that I was thinking for this particular subject is the introduction since April 2026 of joint and several liability for unpaid pay-as-you-earn and NICs. So this is where umbrella companies are in use, and it's estimated that 700,000 individuals are employed through umbrella companies. And the Office of Budgetary Responsibility estimates that these new rules could raise upwards of 870 million pounds by 2027. I'm not certain what benefit that would fund, but it certainly is quite a significant chunk of money. But what it places is a responsibility on agencies to make sure they are policing their labour chain more than they've ever done before, assuming that they aren't already doing so, and that actually managing that risk, how is it working? And that's not just a one-off question at the very beginning, that needs to be repeated so that the agencies are fully familiar with the workings of the umbrella organisation. Because one of the biggest risks is that HMRC don't automatically have to go to the umbrella company to collect that fund. They might choose an easier target. That's not, I'm sure, how the legislation is written, but I think that's the idea anyway. So
it goes
really,
a little bit it goes a little bit to Steve's comment a lot earlier when we're talking about employment law. The responsibility is not with the engager, but on this tax and NI hasn't been paid, under this new law, the liability does potentially go to the engager. And then you think at some future point, especially as the model's seen as a means to potentially avoid responsibilities, could that even happen on employment law situations where at the moment you could say the agent's responsible or whatever, could it actually end up with the agent's reneged? The responsibility now falls on the engager, because that's what's happening here with tax and NI.
It's interesting because, like, when we consult with a contractor that wants to use an umbrella company, usually the advice is that please don't go for the lowest possible margin, because it indicates that immediately, without any in-depth knowledge, we have a list of providers that we give, and usually now T's and C's that we're signing, as I said, you've got recommendations on there anyway. So
that was part of the initial consultation, was do they look at mandating due diligence and recommending that people have these sort of preferred suppliers list. And essentially they have done that, but in a bit of a nuclear way of sort of saying, if you don't do your due diligence and you choose someone dodgy, you can be on the hook. So it kind of is the same sort of process, but with a more nuclear result.
Yeah, and I think, how do you do that though? I mean, that's the question. And I think the threat for, say, an agency side, or for, say, the employer side, is that they can just disappear, and they tend to, but they're less reputable. So then there's one less culpable in that chain. But yeah, I mean, realistically, we do, we've chosen and worked with for many years, and then create that supplier list. So I think it's the best way to do it, and it also means you sleep better at night. But,
well, that's what was happening with the mucky umbrellas, wasn't it? Because the mucky umbrellas, it's sort of, as far as the individual is concerned, they're still working for the same, but not realizing that actually they, across the past year, they've gone through 10 different legal entities, of which the prior legal entity has not passed over the monies to the revenue, and because they're overseas on some island, they're claiming they're exempt from any pursuit. So I think that's where this has come in. Now it sounds like, is that all umbrellas? I think the answer is no, but it's a fair size of umbrellas, because they're probably around 200 of them named now as tax avoidance schemes, but there will be more out there. So there's an element of it's hitting. And so we did actually see the announcement also, because I think heavily through these, they've been, well, we'll do payments through bills of exchange. So that's like a promissory note, I guess, and someone takes a cut here and there. And as far as the person receiving the money, they've had it, even if they haven't. And the revenue have come out and said, sorry, we won't accept a bill of exchange. It's not payment. So although it's a legal means of payment in many circumstances, it's not for the payment of tax to the revenue. They will not accept it. But it seemed that some umbrella companies were heavily promoting them, or being promoted to use it as a vehicle of further avoidance.
And I think from my experience with the good umbrellas, they're very, very obvious. The services they give, the communication, market intel, it becomes very clear it's a completely different commercial relationship. So I think that from my experience. So we've run out of time, guys. It's been a busy one. So I'd like to say great team effort, game of two halves. Sorry, I couldn't resist. But yeah, a lot covered. Help people out. Some really good feedback on the questions as well. So thank you ever so much. I said I would re-reference again. Obviously available to download with the HR and Payroll Pulse Research Survey, one of the largest in Europe, as I've mentioned previously. So please do download that, and obviously slides available at the end as well. So once again, thank you ever so much. Huge amount of information. Join us next month in July. I think that's the last one before summer, before we go away. Hopefully that arrives for you, Karen, as well. And one last thank you, and have a good day, everyone. Cheers, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.